Privacy risks, and to move it from one point to another, they have to define a lot of technical and legal controls. So most of the time they end up not using it at all. And secondly, the data they have may or may not be of good quality. And afterwards, when they have to move it for a certain use case internally or externally, they have to go through this long process, which involves engineering teams, legal teams, and information security teams. And all in all, it takes 3 to 12 months just to move data across from one point to another. And the worst part is the data recipient, what they get is an anonymized version, which destroys a lot of utility. So the keyword here is data anonymization, and what it means is something like this. So on the left-hand side, imagine if we have a picture of Will Smith, we can see it is Will Smith. We can define or we can identify all the facial features. You get 100% utility essentially. But when companies have to move it across teams or across partners, it has to destroy information in it. So these three techniques that you see, they are just some anonymization techniques, and there are like tons of those out there. What it means is you have to trade off utility with privacy, but you can get both. So this is the current data landscape. When we talk about real data, we have full utility, limited coverage because we don't always get the data points that we want, and 0% privacy since all of it is exposed inherently. And to move it across, anonymization takes place. The coverage is the same, but between utility and privacy, they have to do this trade-off. So all in all, when you talk about anonymization, this is to ensure privacy by security techniques. And the fundamental problem with this technique is it leads to poor data quality and high privacy risks. So on the right-hand side, we have three different estimates. I'll just go through one of them, that 80% of credit card owners can be re-identified by 3 transactions only. So when we talk about anonymization, re-identification of users is a big risk. So moving one step ahead, that's where we come in, that how we can first take care of poor quality of data, take care of use cases where you just don't have the data in your real data sets. And the third one is how we can make it easier for teams to be compliant with the laws and still preserve maximum utility. So what we do essentially, we take real data, we train our AI models, and afterwards we are able to generate synthetic data. Now, why synthetic data here is twofold. So first, you see these are all images of people that do not exist in the world. But at the same time, we can make out all the facial features that an AI model needs, and therefore the utility is there. So when I say twofold, 2 angles being the first one, maximum utility, and at the same time, you get maximum privacy. In the event of a breach, let's assume these faces were to be leaked in the public, the law won't hold you legally accountable because they do not exist, and therefore the records or the images belong to no one. So while you are compliant with the laws, you are retaining maximum utility, and what used to take a couple of months can now be done in a couple of days. So at BetterData, this is what we are doing. It's giving privacy guarantees beyond a security approach using AI synthetic data. And why? Just as I mentioned in the previous graph, you get maximum utility, you get 100% compliance, and at the same time, it gives you the opportunity to simulate data the way you want it. More on that later. So before I dive a bit deeper on what we are doing at BetterData, when we talk about synthetic data, it has been around for like a decade, and it all started with these business rule-based techniques. So say I have my passport number, it comprises of maybe 9 digits. The first and the last one has to be an alphabet. In between the 7, they have to be numerical. So I can define those rules if conditions and generate data accordingly. So as we move on the right-hand side of the spectrum, the realism of the data increases. And with GANs, essentially, this is where we are placed. These are deep neural networks. And with GANs, you are being offered more control over the data generation process itself, all the while being more realistic. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but in the interest of time, GANs, since at BetterData, these are the fundamental techniques that we are using. So at BetterData, we combine generative models with privacy-preserving techniques. So on screen here, you see GANs, mainly generative adversarial networks with differential privacy. So this is the subset of techniques that we use to train our AI models. When we talk about GANs, it comprises of two architectures, two networks mainly, an architecture of two networks where both of them use a deep learning model. One of them is called a generator, the other one is called a discriminator. And the idea really is to input real data, and the generator starts producing fake samples. And after a certain while, when the discriminator is not able to tell the difference between the two, that's where the training stops, and you can generate synthetic data. So stopping the training process in GANs is a huge open research problem because GANs easily diverge, and to converge them during training, there's a lot to do in this domain. And secondly, because of the increasing privacy laws, increasing breaches and hacks, and negligence by the employees or human in the loop factor, we want to offer the guarantees of differential privacy, which is being used by the likes of Google, Amazon, Apple, and the end user can define it for themselves, how much utility and privacy they want essentially. So after we generate data, we have a reporting mechanism for quality assurance where we use data utility, data risk, and data fairness metrics to prove that the synthetic data that we generate has the same utility, it doesn't have any privacy risk, and it's fair, free from all biases that were present in the real data set. And in between this loop, after generation, we are able to also offer data enhancement features. So this is where we have built a we have built a data enhancement platform where you can think of it as a simulated environment where you can define a scenario that you want data to generate on, and the platform will do it. So imagine I'm a bank and I have a data set of all the transactions in Singapore, let's say. And now I want to predict or kind of foresee how a millionaire TikToker might look like just because TikTok is trending. On my real data set, I do not have those samples. So what you can do is define this scenario to our platform, and our platform is able to generate the data accordingly. And this is where the stock market example comes in as well. If you input stock market data, what it is able to do is use that timeline as a reference and generate infinitely many timelines from it. And you can simulate as many what-if scenarios as you want, essentially. So all in all, we go from a very controlled data generation and acquisition process, from a very uncontrolled generation process to a finely controlled one. And the vision and one of the principles that we inherently operate on is to make privacy actually accessible. So we went about experimenting around this notion a lot, and different companies have different standards, and to imply our standards to a user, it just didn't make a lot of sense. So we have built this feature into the product itself that using differential privacy, this is a slider where you can decide how much utility or privacy you want. So by default, we pump the utility all the way up to 99%. And if the end user is like, maybe no, I'm sharing it with my external partner, I don't want the utility to be that high, maybe 80%, 85%, depending on their design requirements. So they can just use this slider to fine-tune the data generation process. It's as easy as it gets, and there is no learning curve involved here. So just to summarize, we started with real data. It has poor data quality, and it is being regulated increasingly by laws around the world. We transitioned from that environment to a controlled one, where you get high data quality with no biases, with limitless data samples that you want to simulate. And on top of it, It is 100% compliant with the world, with the privacy regulations around the world. And at the same time, it is super cheap to produce and retain, just because now you don't have to delete it to comply with the privacy laws. So you can retain it indefinitely without worrying about any legal complications. So now the first angle was taking privacy and how we can ensure utility as well as the guarantee of preserving users at the same time with AI. And that's where we started to talk about GANs. Now, when we add AI models with privacy preserving techniques and the fact that you actually are able to make privacy accessible, that's where you can start moving the data around. Synthetic data, mind you, not the real data itself. Because when you talk to enterprises, this is a huge concern for them that our data is so sensitive and maybe we don't want to lose our license or our permission to operate in a certain region. We just don't want to move the real data at all. So the whole context wraps up in a nice format in Web 3.0, which is increasingly being powered by blockchain platforms. And the blockchain platforms, one of the fundamental reasons they picked up is because of the privacy techniques that they have. So the cryptography primitives they use to eliminate the middleman or intermediary from the whole ecosystem that Web 2.0 was built on. The same idea involves here. So what you see is on the right-hand side, we have a data seller who is able to generate synthetic data using our product. And on top of that, we are able to tokenize it. Now, by tokenization, what we mean is essentially you have data, you have information. Now, to replicate that information on a blockchain platform, which can be transacted between two parties, the process itself is called tokenization. And to define tokens, you have like all sorts of standards out there. And the information you want to put in them it's also sky's the limit. You can put anything. So the idea is after generating synthetic data, they tokenize it, and then they're able to stake it with our platform. And at our platform, we have a liquidity pool based on data assets. And on that pool, data buyers, let's say I'm a facial recognition company, and I need access to images of faces, let's say. So they are able to buy that from the liquidity pool and then send the cryptocurrency across. From a portion of it, the data sellers, be it one or infinitely many, they get the payment as a token or as a reward. And all in all, it's to enable a globally responsible data economy where the end user can be a single person or the largest enterprise in the world. What they can do is instead of worrying about moving the real data and the privacy risks involved, they generate the representation from it, tokenize it, and now based on that, they're able to get incentivized. So essentially, it's my data, my value, and if I get incentivized for it, makes all the logical sense. Web 3.0 provides the structure, a decentralized structure to power such an infrastructure. Now, if you replicate it in the Web 2.0 context, so instead of this, you'll have just a central entity having all the control. But in this case, instead of a central entity, all these laws and rules are being governed by cryptography principles. So these are defined, let's say, most of the blockchain natively use elliptic curve cryptography, which is to ensure that transactions are authentic, like the money doesn't go to the wrong address, the recipient gets the money on time, so and so. So all of those guarantees are ensured by data security protocols. And that's where it creates this digital economy, which wasn't just previously possible. So just to summarize, we started with privacy flaws with anonymization. We fixed utility and privacy guarantees with AI. And when we combine those, we have this globally responsible data economy, which can be powered by such a framework in Web 3.0. So the data landscape that I highlighted earlier looks something like this. And with synthetic data, you get the best of all the three worlds. So you get maximum utility, to recap, you get maximum privacy guarantees, and you get maximum coverage because now you're able to simulate what-if scenarios, which were just previously not possible. And one question we get asked a lot is, how good is your synthetic data? So this is just to show a bank Churners use case, and where we got the data set from Kaggle, and the task was a classification task to predict which customer is likely to leave a bank. So what we did was we had a real data set and we had a synthetic version of it, and we trained 4 different ML models. And after training, we tested them on a data set which comprised 20% of the real data, unseen to all the models previously. So if you look at these accuracy scores between real and synthetic, they are pretty much the same. So what it means is, now for my tasks, if I use real data or synthetic data, I am able to achieve pretty similar results. But now the time cost and the budget costs are significantly reduced. So all in all, with synthetic data, we want to create this ecosystem where you have data, and let's say within the company, you have internal data sharing use cases called first-party use cases, or it can be to external partners or companies or to other third parties. So these are some of the use cases. I'm not going to go through all of them in the interest of time, but the broad categories we see is product testing and development. We have AI ML model training, as well as advanced data analytics, where you can essentially improve the quality of data with synthetic versions and go about robust testing and AI model training. And the long shot here is, with synthetic data, you're actually able to move it across any platform, any medium, and get incentivized for it. So just to summarize the value prop, we have real data on the left-hand side. It is a very uncontrolled acquisition process. It is expensive. There may or may not be quality problems. And we move it across mediums for enterprises, for regulated industries, which takes a couple of days rather than months. And we are able to generate highly realistic synthetic data from it. Another thing to take note of that is, if we are talking so much about privacy, in order to train our model, do we need access to the real data of a bank, of a company who's interested to use in our product? So the answer is no. We rely on the technology that we are building, and it is usable out of the box, on cloud or on your premise, however you want. And what happens is, the real data is only used for the duration of the training time, with us having no visibility on it. And after training, real data is discarded. And after that, synthetic data is the one being circulated throughout the whole system. So even if it gets leaked, synthetic data, if it gets leaked, there is nothing to worry about. As I mentioned earlier, it belongs to no one, and therefore you can be held legally accountable. So all in all, that is what we have been doing at BetterData. Thank you so much. Once again, I'm Uzair, co-founder of the company. On screen, you can see my email and contact information. Please feel free to note, and I'll take some questions now, if there are any. Pratik, off to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Uzair, for a very informative and insightful talk. And it was very good to learn about the things going on at BetterData and how you're facilitating that on the blockchain. So I would, as Uzair mentioned, I would open the floor to question. And if anyone in the audience would like to ask the speaker anything, they can go ahead.
Yeah, hi Uzair. It was very good. In fact, the presentation is very comprehensive, covering all the aspects of data security. While I have a question for you, the basic fundamental understanding when it comes to data security and information security, what is the thin line that exists between? Because people generally talk both the things as a same, especially when it comes to the security area. So what is the difference between data security and information security? Is it same or is it different?
Great question, and I totally agree with you. Normally, between data and information, or data security and data privacy, people kind of bucket them together. But the inherent difference lies in 2 aspects. So when we talk about data itself, it's useless. Now, what it represents or the information it gives out is where its value lies. So now you can term it as information or you can term it as privacy. When we talk about data security, it's essentially to provide a medium where the integrity of the data is held intact, so it is not compromised. So think of it about as a window in a room. So now, in order to block the access of an intruder or someone who's not authorized to see or to enter the room, we put a fence around it made of steel bars. So anyone who tries to get in just can't get in because it blocks them out there. But at the same time, I am able to kind of take us like a peek into the room and see, maybe make out how or what is there inside the room. And that's where the prospects of information security or data privacy lie, that how you kind of hold that provenance. So provenance is one of the examples where you kind of go about proving that the data, the information that you have gotten actually is authentic. So think of it as an IoT sensor sending you a reading of a certain, let's say, certain room temperature or air quality. So how do you identify that it is authentic? So when it is being transmitted, let's say if the air quality index, I'm not sure what is the standardization metric, but let's say if it's 1. So data security ensures that 1 is transmitted and 1 is received. And information security or data privacy kind of ensures that 1 was actually transmitted by the sender. So it's a very thin line between these two. And the way I segregate them, it's just my own opinion, is data itself, it's just kind of providing a cloak, and in between is the information where the value lies. So when you ensure that through information security techniques or privacy techniques, it's essentially to preserve that value itself. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Uzair. This is Kishore.
Hello.
So yeah, so I do have one question. So in regards to various data protection laws like GDPR, CCPA, even India is coming with PDPB. So how do you think that data is going to flow between these jurisdictions, and what would be the consequences, or what would be the changes that we need to adapt, based on these challenges?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you kind of review all of these data regulations, one thing that stands out is everyone says that as long as you anonymize data, the law doesn't apply. So say I am a bank in India and I have a presence in different countries or different cities, let's say. So that essentially becomes a use case of internal data sharing, and the PDPL essentially says that in order to move data from, let's say, a consumer banking unit to your HR department, you have to anonymize it. So after anonymization, the law doesn't apply. But there is a catch to it, that if there is a breach or there is a data leak and it identifies one user or a set of users, then you're going to be held legally accountable. And like GDPR, it depends how much fine is issued. GDPR issues up to 4% of the annual revenue, or $20 million, whichever is higher. So it is defined accordingly. Now, if the bank in India wants to share data with an external partner in the US, the same law also applies. But when you go from the Indian law to CCPA, which is in the US, you have to essentially make sure that you are complying with both. And that's where the data privacy landscape is really, really tricky, because the moment you escape one jurisdiction, you enter another one. So maybe I'll give you an example that with GDPR and CCPA, this is kind of an open debate. For certain contexts, they say IP address is a personal identifier. And for other contexts, they say it is not. So let's say if in a country, we don't categorize IP address as private information or personally identifiable information, right? So for my country, life is good. I don't need to worry about it. But at the same time, the moment it goes to, let's say, US or EU, it immediately is recognized as PII data, and that's where I have to do something about it. So for all of these laws, you have directly identifiable information, and then you have quasi identifiers. where you kind of combine different parameters together to identify a certain individual. So in that case, navigating those jurisdictions become incredibly difficult, and that's where synthetic data makes all the sense again, that you synthesize data in a way that everything is generated from scratch and it is compliant anywhere in the world. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, got it. Thank you for your response. Yeah.
Thank you.
So then I also have a question for you. So enabling the data transfer through blockchain, and there's no central authority over there. And we're going to see that happening more and more as we move into the Web3. So how do you think that data is going to change and data is going to change moving forward? Since right now it's majorly controlled by the big players, and how do you think that change is going to happen?
So right now when people say, I mean, I've heard it so many times from my friends. They say, I don't care about data privacy, man. Like, I don't have any high quality good or any sensitive information that someone might be interested. But the inherent fact lies that since we are not able to control our data and its value, we subconsciously give the value away. Since, let's say, Google or Amazon or Microsoft, there are like a few big conglomerates out there capitalizing on the value. Like when we say things like Google was down for 1 hour and it cost them $5 billion, right? So like to a layman, it doesn't make sense at all. But on the back end, using our information, using our searches, our clicks, our tickets, they're able to do so much stuff. So the same concept applies in the Web 3.0 context. So when eventually, I think within the next 10 years, people will start to realize that they can actually control their data in a way that they can be incentivized. And except incentivization, I don't think this trend can change. And that is exactly where Web 3.0 is positioning itself, that it's my data, it's my value, and I should have full control over it. If you want to use it, you have to give me something. So this trend will be like slowly, it will be picked up by everyone out there in the world. Because imagine like suddenly if someone comes to me that, hey, I just need your Facebook data and you'll get $10 of it. So trust me, if you pitch this to 1,000 people, you'll easily find like 100 who will be ready to do that. So how do you make it secure is the next big thing. And with Web 3.0, like I earlier mentioned, privacy preserving techniques is a huge hot topic, and that's where they're using all sorts of security protocols to confirm and authenticate all of these transactions as they happen. So that's a trend that I foresee going forward. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. And would anyone else have a question for the speaker? So I think...
Yeah, I have one more question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sure.
If we talk about incidents that have been raised, especially on the data leak or a security breach that happens for the PIIs, is there anything else, or is there any other such incidents that can be recorded under the bucket of data security?
I mean, it's quite subjective in a way, because how do you define a leak? And a leak is a leak. It doesn't constitute anything, but the information that it gives out is where the gray area lies, I would say. So from that angle, nothing concrete comes to my mind. Could you like elaborate a bit more on it?
For example, if an intruder attacks, that will come as an in the network security aspect. Similarly,
Yes.
if there is a problem with respect to firewalls or user authentication or the
Oh, you dropped out.
Your audio is not there, I think.
Yep, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're breaking.
I think my internet connection is unstable. Let me put it
Okay,
on
now,
chat.
yeah, let's do that.
Meanwhile, would anyone else have a question from the speaker, or we can close after some discussion? Okay, so we'll just wait for Sunil to type.
Okay, got it. So yeah, like network security, let's take an example of my laptop. So my laptop has my data, it is connected to this Wi-Fi network. Network security applies there to only authorize the right people, not the wrong people. And then after getting access comes my data. If it leaks, this is data loss or breach. But in most of the times, instead of a data loss or a data leak, what you can essentially do is something called attribute disclosure. But you can put them under the category of data loss or breach. It's more, it more comes under the bracket of data risks. So like biasness, it's a data risk. Sensitive attribute disclosure. What it means is instead of recording or leaking the whole data set, I can use few different quasi identifiers, maybe my IP address, my MAC address, my zip code, let's say, and I have 3 dogs, let's say. So using these quasi identifiers, I can make out, okay, within this zip code, within this street, there is only one person who has 3 dogs, and he or she may have only one computer.
Okay,
but this is a very, very small bracket right now because people do it without knowing the consequences. Like inherently, people can't kind of quantify if I'm leaking privacy or not because it's just not definitely defined as long as a breach happens. So the breach happens, then you have all these like sensitive attributes disclosed, and everything kind of gets bucketed together in this way. But at BetterData, what we are looking at essentially is like data breach, data disclosure risks as 2 separate things. So data breach is where the whole access is compromised and the data just flows to a whole new domain. And data privacy risks or data disclosure risks, that's where you kind of prevent anyone from inferencing some information from a data set that you don't want them to know. So that's a distinction that we are looking at. There may be tons out there, but I'm not going to say I know all of them. But at this time, this comes to my mind. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you there for answering all our questions. And so I think we can close it with that. And thank you there and everyone for attending this. And I hope it was beneficial for everyone. And so,
likewise. Thank you, Pratik, and everyone. Take care. Stay safe. Have a great weekend. Bye.